Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Busgang, General Partner and Co-Founder at Flybridge Capital Partners. So I'm a venture capitalist. You know that because I've got the requisite uniform of khakis and blue button-down shirt. I'm also a professor at Harvard Business School. I teach an entrepreneurship class called Launching Technology Ventures to second-year MBAs. The class is full of founders and joiners, two concepts I'll come back to in a minute, but the whole focus of my work as a venture capitalist and as a professor at HBS is around entrepreneurship. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about a book that I recently wrote called Entering Startup Land, a book that will help you answer the question, is joining a startup right for you? By the way, if the answer to that question is no, this is going to be a very quick conversation. I'll have a couple things that I'll tell you about to help you decide whether a startup is right for you, and then I'll go into more detail how to pick the right startup and how to get in, navigating your way into the best possible opportunity. So let's begin. So this is the book, Entering Startup Land, an essential guide to finding the right job. And what I've done here on the board is outline what I'll cover in the time that we have together. These points I'll cover in brief summary, and hopefully you'll take a look at the book if you find the material interesting and go into more detail. So let's jump in. The first thing I recommend is assessing your fit, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you do that. But this is the point in your logical flow where you want to decide, is a startup right for me? Because a startup isn't for everyone, and so we'll talk about why it might be right for you. The second thing we'll talk about is picking the right company. If you do decide that you want to join a startup, the whole process of selecting the right startup and navigating your way in is an incredibly important process, and so we'll get into the details of that. And then finally, positioning yourself well. Once you decide you want to join a startup, and once you've selected a few of the startups that you would like to target, the key then is to make yourself an attractive candidate for those companies. And I'll go into a lot of detail how to do that. In this work, I draw not only on my experience as an investor over the last 15 years, but also as an entrepreneur. I was the co-founder of a company that was backed by venture capital, and also before that an executive team member of another company. And I also work with hundreds and hundreds of students over the years. And so in this work, I try to synthesize all of that experience into a very simple rubric that you can use and hopefully adapt. So here we go. So first, assessing your fit. There are two things that, in my experience, startup-ready people like to have best. Oh, by the way, I should define those two terms, joiners and founders. Let me do that quickly. So is joining a startup right for you? Let's just go into that. Because many people talk a lot about founders and put founders on the pedestal. The founder obviously is the individual that develops the idea for the startup and that first employee. But the joiner is equally, if not more important, because for every founder, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of joiners. The joiners are the ones that join someone else's startup, that employee 2 to 2,000, to help build the company and turn the idea into a business. So this book is really focused on joiners. There are a lot of books that have been written for founders. I wrote one myself called Mastering the VC Game. But this is a book, unlike many others, that's just really for joiners. So is joining a startup right for you, and how do you assess your fit? There are two attributes that I like to focus on when I counsel students and entrepreneurs regarding whether joining a startup is right for you. The first thing, and these are both what I would characterize as cultural concepts. That is it a fit culturally? This is not about your hard skills, this is more about your soft skills. The first thing I say is think like an owner. And the reason that's so important as a question, are you comfortable with thinking like an owner, is because every startup, no matter how large or small, you want to have an ownership mentality. I learned this from my dad. My dad was an entrepreneur many, many years ago. He survived the Holocaust and came to the US after the war and started his own company, really when he had no right to do so. And he used to tell me that when he would find a paperclip on the ground, he would want, that's my paperclip drawing, by the way. That's my not so good paperclip drawing. Let's try this. That might be better. Anyway, he would say to his employees, if you see a paperclip on the ground, I don't want you to walk by it and say that the janitorial staff will take care of it. I want to have someone who's going to bend down and pick up that paperclip and throw it away. So you have to really take ownership over the environment. And that's incredibly important in startup land, taking ownership and really thinking like an owner. The next thing about assessing your fit is regarding being comfortable with uncertainty. And one of the dynamics here that I talk about in my book is whether you can handle an environment that's so dynamic and always changing. And that dynamism is inherent in startup land. The companies are always changing, the organization is changing, your role is changing. You really need to be comfortable with those dynamics. And so if you're comfortable thinking like an owner, and if you're comfortable with uncertainty, then startup land is probably a good fit for you. So now let's jump into picking the right company. This actually is the harder part. Many people, young professionals and mid-career professionals alike, think they want to be in startups, but they don't know how to pick the right company. And the paradigm that I use is a 4-step process that I recommend to the students I work with and the entrepreneurs that I advise. The first thing I say is to pick a city. And the reason that's so important is that startup land is made up of ecosystems around geographies. Everybody, of course, knows about Silicon Valley, but there are a handful of other incredibly important ecosystems around the world. In Tel Aviv, in Beijing, in Berlin, here in the US, in Boston, where I'm standing here today. These are really important startup ecosystems. And there are probably 10 to 20 really high quality, world-class startup ecosystems that you want to draw yourself to. If you're not in one of those ecosystems, you have two choices. You can either move there, which has obviously personal trade-offs, but many professional benefits, or you can find a way to network and navigate your way there. So that's a really important first step, is to pick a city. The second thing I recommend to folks is to pick a domain. What is the area that you're most interested in? What possible domain? You can't just have this broad swath of startups that you say you want to get into. You really need to narrow it down to pick a particular domain. And the way I recommend that is what I call the Wall Street Journal test. And the Wall Street Journal test is when you pick up the Wall Street Journal, if you still pick it up, maybe with a tablet, what do you find yourself drawn to? What are the articles that you're most interested in? Because the things that you read in your free time proactively are probably an indication of the domain that you're most interested in. Maybe it's autonomous vehicles. Maybe it's cryptocurrency. Maybe it's augmented reality. Whatever the domain is that you're most interested in, that's the domain you should be pursuing startups. The next piece of advice I give is to pick a stage. And there are really 3 stages of startups. And some people, depending on your risk tolerance and your comfort with uncertainty, some people are going to be more comfortable at one stage or another. Those stages I characterize in the following way. First stage, the most raw, unbridled stage, is the jungle. In the jungle, you're pre-product market fit. It's not clear what direction you should be heading in. You have a few friends around you, a team, you're with machetes, and you're hacking your way through. It's a very chaotic state, and some people love that chaos. For some people, that's exactly where they want to be. For other people, they prefer the middle stage, the dirt road. When you're in the dirt road stage of a startup, you're post-product market fit, but you're still figuring out sales and marketing. You're still figuring out scaling. The path is windy and bumpy, but there is a path. These tend to be companies that are perhaps 50 to 500 employees, whereas the jungle stage companies tend to be maybe 1 to 50 employees, just broadly summarizing and simplifying. And then the final stage is the highway stage. The highway startups are on the right path, moving smoothly, and you're really now trying to figure out how to build the machine as efficiently as possible. And those tend to be companies that are greater than 500 employees. So depending on your risk tolerance, depending on whether you want to get in earlier and be in that stage where the figuring it out is part of the problem, or whether